For a century, if you wanted to understand global power, you just had to look at oil, right? Whoever controlled the oil in the Middle East pretty much controlled the global economy. And whoever controlled the economy, well, they ran the world. But listen, as we look at the global landscape today, that era, it's closing. We are already in the middle of a brand new energy war. Only this time around, the rules have completely changed. We aren't fighting over what's buried beneath the sand in the Persian Gulf anymore. We're fighting a high-stakes geopolitical war over critical minerals in South America and Africa, and the massive, sprawling clean energy factories dominating Asia. Welcome to our latest explainer, where we're going to visually unpack exactly who is controlling the world's clean energy future. To really wrap our heads around this new era, we have to start with this brilliant concept the Carnegie Endowment introduced back in September 2025, the Electrostate. And let me be absolutely clear right out of the gate here. In this new clean energy race, China is not just some rising challenger. They've already won the first phase. They are the world's very first true electrostate. What does that mean? It means they are simultaneously the dominant manufacturer and exporter of clean tech, while also rapidly electrifying their own massive domestic economy. It's a dual threat that completely rewrites how global geopolitical leverage works. All right, Section 1, the new great game, China's monopoly. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this, because we really need to grasp the sheer scale of what we're talking about here. China isn't just participating in the market anymore. They are the absolute monopolist. Just look at this number, 1,200 gigawatts. By late 2025, that was China's annual solar manufacturing capacity. Now, why does that matter? Well, the International Energy Agency says the entire world needs to deploy 761 gigawatts a year by 2030 to hit net zero. So, to put that in perspective, China can literally manufacture everything the entire planet needs by themselves and still have 65% of their factory capacity sitting completely idle. No country in human history has ever achieved this level of dominance over a technology this consequential. And this dominance, it's across the board. The latest 2025 data from Ember shows that China produces 4 in 5 solar modules globally. That is an 80% share. And guess what? It is the exact same story for battery cells. 80% global share. 2/3 of the world's electric vehicles, made in China. They are completely out-investing the rest of the globe, dropping roughly $1 trillion on clean energy in 2025 alone. Now, I hear this a lot. There's this stubborn myth out there that China just copies Western technology and mass produces it on the cheap. We really need to dismantle that idea right now. A staggering 75% of all global clean energy patent applications are now coming out of China. We have completely shifted from made in China to invented in China. They hold a massive R&D lead. A perfect example is CATL. They're China's battery giant. They've developed groundbreaking cobalt-free sodium-ion batteries, and they absolutely dominate the global shift toward LFP battery chemistry. The cutting-edge innovation is happening right there in their labs. Moving on to Section 2, the choke points, the geography of critical minerals. So you obviously can't build a clean energy future without physical building blocks. And there is a very, very difficult story here. Every battery requires minerals. And according to 2025 data from the Sustainability Atlas, 73% of the world's mined cobalt comes from a single, highly unstable nation, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And there's a stark human cost to this. Our clean energy future, the very EVs we drive, are built on a foundation that heavily relies on artisanal mining and documented child labor in the DRC. It is a brutal paradox sitting right at the heart of our green transition. But what's really interesting about this slide is that the true power doesn't actually lie in the mining itself. Look at step 2, chemical processing. You might extract lithium in Australia or cobalt in the DRC, sure, but the real value is captured where the material is refined into a usable industrial form. And this is China's true hidden monopoly. They control over 85% of global rare earth processing capacity and the vast majority of lithium and cobalt processing. The raw rocks come from all over the world, but they almost all have to pass through Chinese chemical plants before they ever become a solar panel or a battery. And that brings us to a literal trillion-dollar geopolitical gamble unfolding right now in South America's lithium triangle. This is where policy dictates power. Take Bolivia. They hold the world's absolute largest lithium reserves, an estimated 21 million tons. Yet they produce less than 2% of the global supply. Why? Because their strictly state-controlled approach just failed to scale. Now contrast that with Argentina, which took a totally open market approach and has seen massive high growth. Or Chile, which holds a 25 to 30% share using a hybrid model. The minerals might be in the ground, for sure, but government policy decides if they ever see the light of day. Section 3. The West's Response. Subsidies, Tariffs, and Retreats. With this incredible monopoly taking shape, let's shift the map over to Europe. Back in 2022, after the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline and the sudden loss of Russian gas, Europe learned a very painful lesson about energy dependence. Their response the next year, in 2023, was a massive, accelerated push toward renewable energy, but look where that left them by 2025. In their desperate rush to escape Russian fossil fuels, they just went ahead and created a brand new, deep dependence on Chinese clean tech. Today, the overwhelming majority of solar panels installed in Europe are Chinese-made. They essentially traded one dependency for another. Over in the United States, the policy response has been, well, incredibly turbulent. In 2022, the U.S. passed the Inflation Reduction Act, unleashing roughly $400 billion to build up domestic supply chains. And for a minute, that briefly caused the U.S. to actually surge past China in battery investment. But then the political winds shifted. By 2025, the Trump administration's One Big Beautiful Bill rolled back and cut hundreds of billions in those very same clean energy subsidies. Yet, paradoxically, the administration maintained and even increased steep tariffs on Chinese panels and EVs. So, structurally speaking, the U.S. is currently protecting a domestic clean energy industry from foreign competition while simultaneously cutting the funding needed to actually build that domestic industry in the first place. Let's look at Section 4, the overcapacity paradox and the global South. So let's pivot to the fascinating, unintended consequences of China's massive manufacturing output. The crucial point here is this staggering 90% price drop since 2010. Because China's dealing with immense overcapacity, literally manufacturing more solar panels than the entire world can install, Chinese manufacturers are currently locked in this fierce price war, and they're losing billions of dollars. But their financial loss? It's the developing world's gain. This 90% price drop is aggressively democratizing power. Chinese solar panels are preventing blackouts in South Africa, literally keeping hospitals running. They're bringing first-time electricity to rural villages in Kenya and allowing citizens in Pakistan to bypass their unreliable, expensive national grids entirely. However, this brings up a massive historical paradox, highlighted beautifully by the Berkeley Political Review. We call it the extraction trap. See, countries like the DRC and Chile are supplying the critical minerals, the very foundation of this whole clean energy revolution. Yet they capture almost none of the trillion-dollar supply chain value. They export the cheap raw materials, while the wealthy nations, predominantly China, manufacture the goods and capture all the wealth. It's tough to see, but the new energy economy is tragically repeating one of the oldest patterns of global inequality. Finally, Section 5, the end game, 3 clean energy futures. As we wrap up this explainer, we need to look at how this transition will ultimately play out. Scenario 1 is pretty straightforward: Chinese dominance. In this future, the world just accepts the reality of the market. The global energy transition happens rapidly, we get the absolute cheapest prices, and our climate goals are met effectively. But the cost? The world builds a profound structural dependence on a single nation's supply chain and processing capability. We're talking about a reliance as deeply entrenched as our 20th century dependence on OPEC for oil. Then there's Scenario 2, a fragmented transition. Here, Western tariffs effectively split the world right in two. The West creates its own premium, highly protected domestic supply chain. But the paradox is that these tariffs actually make the energy transition drastically more expensive for you, the Western consumer, driving up the cost of your EVs and home solar panels. Meanwhile, the global South, which isn't bound by those tariffs, continues to rely on and rapidly deploy cheap Chinese technology, moving way faster and cheaper than the West ever could. And finally, we have Scenario 3, minerals conflict. This is the bottleneck scenario. Here, the physical Earth and the geopolitics controlling it just halts our progress. Imagine extreme instability in the DRC suddenly disrupting global cobalt supplies, or resource nationalism in places like Bolivia stalling lithium expansion, or maybe China weaponizes export restrictions on rare earths. In this future, the entire global transition just stalls out, completely constrained by the politics of the ground from which these minerals are extracted. Which leaves us with this final provocative question to reflect on. The technology to power human civilization on sunshine, wind, and stored batteries, it works brilliantly, and the prices are definitely right. But will the geopolitics of this new great game, this intense battle for control over factories and minerals, delay the transition our planet simply cannot afford to wait for? We're running a race not just against a changing climate, but against human politics. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this really helped clear up the complex global web behind the clean energy revolution. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.